Hello, and welcome to One-on-One with Robert Doar. I'm your host, Robert Doar, and thanks for tuning in today. As president of the American Enterprise Institute, I have the unique privilege of working with America's greatest policy experts. These scholars focus on policy issues in the fields of education, economics, energy, foreign and defense, and so much more. Subscribe to this podcast for exclusive access to in-depth discussions on the most pressing policy issues. Together, with my guests, we'll challenge political preconceptions, explore innovative ideas, and create, I hope, a freer and safer world. This week, our guest is Marc Thiessen. And Marc, you know, is just one of the great members of the AEI community, but he's more than that. He's more than an AEI fellow. He's a former speechwriter for George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld. He's a Washington Post columnist who writes, you know, I think the most readable and solid op-ed that page has. And he's also a Fox News contributor. I think you're a Fox News contributor. And so he's plays all over the place, which is what we like our scholars to do.
I carry the AEI flag all over Washington.
That's right. That's right. And I really appreciate that. And on top of that, he's a great person to have in the building and have to get to know our other scholars and to support the mission of AEI, which we really very much appreciate.
Thank you.
And he's also prolific. And so we've written a couple things that have gotten a lot of attention lately and that I found very interesting. And the first one was in your role as sort of a political analysis. Mm-hmm. And you've written that President Trump and his campaign needs the Haley voters.
Yes.
And so why does he need them, and how do you think he's doing?
Because he can't win without them, because there's millions of them. Either that did cast their vote for her or that would have cast if the primaries had gone forward, and because the 2020 election was decided by 42,941 votes in 3 states. So it's not going to be the core base that gets him the presidency. It's going to be swing voters, and Haley voters are swing voters. They're some of them are Republicans, some of them are independents. They're centrist. But they're concerned, and he needs to reach out to those people and win them over if he wants to win the presidency.
And just as you think about them, what are some of the issues that distinguishes them from President Trump's base?
Well, clearly, foreign policy was one of them, but it's interesting that it doesn't distinguish them from him necessarily. I think that there's a difference between Donald Trump on foreign policy and some of the people who are the most vocal supporters of Donald Trump on foreign policy. Donald Trump isn't an isolationist. When you think about this, Donald Trump whacked Qasem Soleimani. He bombed Syria twice in enforcing Obama's red line. He threatened North Korea with fire and fury, the likes of which they had never seen, and if they kept threatening America. Yeah. He moved our embassy to Jerusalem and declared that it was the capital of Israel and recognized it as such. And as a result of that, 3 Arab-Israeli peace accords, Abraham Accords, came out of that. That is not a man who is unwilling to flex American military might. He is the only person on whose watch Vladimir Putin in the 21st century. Vladimir Putin didn't invade a neighbor. He's the only president since Ronald Reagan that we didn't get dragged into a new war.
So that means that he could be more attractive to the Haley voters than he gives himself credit for.
If he makes the case. And by the way, also, he's when the Obama-Biden administration after the 2014 invasion was refusing to give the Ukrainians lethal aid, he gave them Javelin missiles, which they used to help defend themselves after Putin invaded again on Biden's watch. So he's got a case to make that he's not an isolationist. He's willing to project American force. He's got an argument to make on foreign policy.
So I'm going to come back to that because I do agree with you that played out in the way in which the vote for aid to Ukraine ended up happening and Trump's behavior leading up to that. And we'll get back to that in a minute.
Sure.
But sticking with the Haley voters or the people in the middle or the Republicans, the George W. Bush supporters who are more comfortable with someone else than with President Trump. On domestic policy or on style or on respect for the rule of law, do you think there's anything he could do there that would send a message that might make people more comfortable with him?
So first of all, in terms of making himself comfortable, there's a model that he can take from George W. Bush. In the 2004 convention speech that George W. Bush, I can say this because I didn't write it. It was before I was writing speeches for him. But in the 2004 convention speech, there was some concern that Bush had a little bit too much swagger, a little bit too much Texas drawl, and all the rest of it. And he had this section in his convention speech where he said, a lot of people think I have a little bit too much of a swagger. In Texas, we call that walking. And a lot of people think I'm a little too blunt. Well, for that, you can blame the little white-haired lady up there in the rafters. But I've always put America first, and I've always put you first, and I've always done my best to fight for you. And what that did was that there were people who were concerned about him, weren't sure if they wanted to vote for him again. It gave them permission because it said he gets it. He understands why I don't like him or why I don't like some things about him. Trump needs something similar. He needs to do something like, a similar version, a New York version of that, right? Maybe I like the way I talk and, I'm a New York, real estate guy or something like that. Something that just tells people, I get it. I understand why you don't like me, but were you better off 4 years ago than you are today? That's the case he needs to make.
Well, it would be helpful if he didn't say the things that make people think that he's going to be an autocrat. He could just flat out say, "Look, I understand the checks and balances. I respect the rule of law." How about that? Wouldn't that
help
help?
Too. Sure, yeah. Why not? I'll throw that in too if I was ready.
It's funny with Trump because this gets to the sort of take him figuratively, not literally. What's the joke they make about him? He does say things that if you took literally are problematic.
Sure.
Mark, you have to acknowledge that.
Oh, of course I do.
Yeah.
Well, he's done things that are problematic too. I'm second to none in my criticism of him on January 6th. But a lot of people's concerns about January 6th have been eclipsed by the counter attack on him, which is waging lawfare. Donald Trump is facing 91 charges. Charles Manson faced 10. 91 charges at the federal, state, and local level. The left seems to have this idea that we're going to burn down our democracy in order to save it. That our hatred of Donald Trump is so intense that it justifies anything. It justifies charging him. It justifies using these trumped up charges to try and bankrupt him. 14th Amendment to try and kick him off the ballot. I'm more concerned about the institutional guardrails of our democracy. So January 6th, which I thought was an absolute atrocity, and I thought he was responsible for it. And I've told him this, and I've said it publicly in my columns. There was no chance that he was going to succeed in staying in the presidency because the founders created institutional checks and balances. All the courts ruled against him, including Trump-appointed judges. He met with some electors from Michigan, and they were really happy to meet with him in the White House, and they came out and gave a statement saying, no, we're not sending new electors. The Congress did its job. The Vice President did its job. The Supreme Court did its job. Everybody did its job. And so that wasn't going to succeed. But the left seems to want to destroy the institutional guardrails in order to stop him. And I find that more of a threat to our democracy than he is.
Okay, I'm going to let that go for now, and I'll come back to that in a second. But I guess I just want to say one thing about let's take the January 6th item, because, I come from a background of law and order.
Yeah.
My father was a prosecutor, and he was very involved in reacting strongly to the riots in Detroit and in Los Angeles in the 60s. And we are believers in law enforcement.
Yeah.
And there was a riot on Capitol Hill.
100%.
And there is an aspect of the litigation that the special prosecutor is using, which I do find hard to understand. But people who attacked police officers and broke windows and invaded the Capitol should be punished for
100%.
that. But he's saying they shouldn't.
And he refers to them as the January 6th hostages and other things like that. It's terrible. 100%.
And it also goes against the sort of, in every other context, people on the right are normed to be more respectful of the law, more willing to enforce the law, to not excuse people for, society's problems and when they commit crimes.
You're demanding consistency, Robert.
Yes, I am. I am. But the person who has consistency on this one, respect for the law and respect for law and order, is me.
Yeah, I agree.
And you.
Yeah, I agree.
But not Donald Trump.
No, I agree with that. And what he did on January 6th is problematic. What he said about it since is problematic. And what he says about it now is problematic. But again, I guess we get into this situation where we have a binary choice. I think 7 in 10 Americans didn't want this rematch. And we've been given it anyway. And so we're stuck making choices. And the left, one of the things that the left has done by going after him in such a way that is offensive to so many people on so many levels and so many fronts is they've allowed him to become the victim, and they've allowed him. And people, if you look at the polls, people's concerns about January 6th have been eclipsed by their concerns about the legal attack on him.
Well, you're raising an interesting question about the Biden campaign and President Biden and his team. You know, you've said President Trump needs to make an effort to bring in the Haley voters. Yeah. So does President Biden.
Sure.
I mean, it would be nice if we had the moderate, bring us together president and administration that we were promised. And it's very funny that they are running a base election too.
Yes.
And
it's become the new
get
model.
it.
There's the new model of politics today is energize your base, or in Biden's case, try and re-energize your base and try to stop from revolting against you. And then the people in the middle just get stuck choosing between the lesser of two evils, which is an unappealing way to set up our elections. But you know, Joe Biden. So here's where I see the election is that Donald Trump has a very strong base that is very devoted to him. He's got a problem with swing voters, with the Haley voters, with the independents, and all the rest of it. Joe Biden has a problem with the swing voters, and he has a problem with his base, and that's why he's losing right now. Doesn't mean he's going to lose, but the problem he's stuck with is that because his base is in revolt, especially over Israel and about the Palestinians, but other things as well, is that he's trying to appease them. And the more he appeases them and goes to the left, the more he offends the center. Yeah. And if he goes to the center, he offends them. And so he's sort of caught in this vice. And he seems to think that he ought to be appeasing the base more than appealing to the center. And so...
Yeah, I agree with that. It looks that way, but it politically it makes no sense because that base will be with him, and that's not where the election's going to be decided.
Or they'll be with Jill Stein.
Yeah, right. But they'll go. But I just don't understand it, and it's troubling for those of us, you were with me the other day when I talked about it. We had a gathering of AEI friends and supporters and participants in the national debate, and we said we've got people here who represent the Trump administration and their views of the world, and we've got people who represent the Biden administration, and then we have people who represent 70% of Americans who don't like either. And so I just wish we did have the campaign where you advised President Trump to run it, which is toward those people that are looking for a new administration that can lead closer. I hate saying the center, because I don't view the Haley voters as being center voters.
Exactly.
But they have a group of views about our entitlements, about foreign affairs, about immigration policy that is more consistent with what she was putting forward. Yeah. And they're right there for both campaigns, and neither one of them is really talking to them.
So here's what if I was advising Donald Trump, here's how I'd advise him to run. I'm the candidate of the return to normalcy, right? So Joe Biden said he is an agent of chaos, and I'm going to end the chaos. Yeah. Well, is there less chaos now? Look at the border, chaos. Campuses, chaos. Ukraine, chaos. Middle East, chaos. There's more chaos now than there was. And so if Trump were smart, what he would do is turn around and say,
I should let you know that your fellow AEI scholar wrote a column that published today just saying exactly that. Oh, okay. Matt Continetti.
All right.
You're not reading your AEI this week or AEI today. And you must admit that Matt has been a great addition to our team.
Oh, my gosh, he's fantastic.
Isn't he great?
His book, The Right, is one of the it is a classic. I will make my children and grandchildren read it.
There's some good additions.
Yes.
You've all 11 is also great.
100%.
Many Adam White. Okay, so let's put politics aside. Let's go to foreign affairs, where, by the way, this is where you come from. This is your it's your, what it would be a batter would say this is his sweet spot.
Sure.
And you do it very, very well.
Thank you.
So the way it looked to me was that the aid bill for Ukraine, Israel, and China passed overwhelmingly in the Senate and was hung up in the House for a long time.
Yep.
and you would acknowledge that it was really a close-run thing.
I thought that it was a matter of Speaker Johnson bringing it to the floor and it was going to pass.
Okay.
So I don't think that the bill was in danger if it got to a vote. It was just a question of getting it to a place where he could bring it to a vote.
And how do you explain, now tell as much as you can based on your source book, the dynamic between Speaker Johnson, the Trump supporter members of his caucus who voted against it, and Donald Trump, and how did he make that work?
So I think the argument that Speaker Johnson made, which I also made in some columns, is that one, that if you wanted to help Donald Trump, the best way to do it was to pass Ukraine aid. And the reason for that is this. Trump has said that he would negotiate a deal to end the war in Ukraine. And if the Republicans were to not pass Ukraine aid and Russia started winning and started marching toward Kyiv and started advancing and started carpet bombing Ukrainian cities, number one, Republicans would be blamed. It would be our Afghanistan. And number two, Kyiv would probably fall not during the Biden administration, but when Trump came in, so it would be literally his Afghanistan. And then also, he would have no leverage because Putin wouldn't listen to him, would have no incentive to listen to him and take a deal if he was on the march. So it was in Donald Trump's personal interest, if he wants to cut a deal to end the war in Ukraine, for that aid bill to pass. And I think that argument was persuasive with him, and he basically didn't back the people in many of whom are his supporters who wanted to kill the bill.
But you're agreeing with me if I were to say that if it had died, he would have been blamed for it and it would have been justified.
If he had come out against it and it died, yes, 100%. And I don't think he wanted to own that because he would have owned the results. So I think he made the wise choice. And look, there were a lot of people coming in and lobbying him. Viktor Orban came and urged him not to do it, but David Cameron and President Duda of Poland came in and met with him and urged him to do it. And I think
Speaker Johnson went down.
Speaker Johnson went down, and it was very important that he backed Speaker Johnson. Mm-hmm. That was an implicit endorsement of the bill because he endorsed Johnson, who was bringing the bill to the floor, and so that made it possible for it to get through.
Okay, foreign policy and military analyst Marc Thiessen, is it enough?
No, it's not enough, but it's better than nothing. I mean, so here's the problem we face. I do an annual set of columns at the end of every year, the 10 best things and 10 worst things that the president did. Started it under Trump. 10 best things, 10 worst things Trump did. I do it now every year for Biden as well. And every year so far, the number one thing on both my lists for President Biden has been Ukraine. So, yes, he saved Ukraine, but he has slow-rolled the weapons so much so that they have not been able to make – they haven't lost, but he doesn't have a strategy to win, which is one of the things that was very hard to make the case for the supplemental is like, where's the strategy for victory? So, you know, they need long-range fires. They need F-16s. They need more air defenses. And Biden is withholding these things, has been withholding these things.
So let's talk about long-range fire for a second. There's a story today that this will be out in the soon, and right after this. So you'll know that the Russian people put out that they were practicing with tactical nuclear weapons, and this was directly related to I think the French president's statement that it was time for NATO to get more involved, and maybe another European country saying it was okay with them to support Ukraine firing weapons into Russia.
That was Britain, yes.
Yes. So these things happened. So now I'm asking you, should the United States say to Ukraine it's okay to fire weapons into Russia?
I think that they should give them the long-range weapons and that allow them to hold the Russian forces at bay and threaten Crimea in the way. So what happened in Crimea and in the Black Sea is that the Brits gave them Storm Shadow, which are their version of the long-range ATACMS, which forced them to withdraw their fleet, their Black Sea fleet, out of range. Right now, the Russians, because they don't have long-range weapons. They know exactly the range of the Ukrainian weapons, and they can come in within that range, get close, and start taking out their troops. They would have to pull back. So even if you didn't attack Russia proper, you could hold them back on their lines and make
okay. So
progress.
just to be clear about this, I want to be clear because this is when we were in Warsaw now more than a year ago. It was clear from the American officials who briefed us, Marc, that the Biden administration's policy was
terrified.
help Ukraine as much as you can, but keep the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so I'm just asking you, former Bush administration official, foreign policy expert, if Ukraine started firing weapons into Russia, beyond the border of what Ukraine's border, including Crimea, but into Russia, would you be okay with that?
Of course. Why should Russia be able to fire into Ukraine if Ukraine can't fire into Russia? And I think the threat of nuclear weapons, look, you always have to take nuclear threats seriously, but there's no rational act or argument for Putin to actually use them. I'll give you a couple of reasons why I don't think he'll actually use nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. Number one, as Jack Keane has pointed out, the Russian military, unlike the Soviet military, is not trained or equipped to fight on a nuclear battlefield. So that's number one. His generals would oppose using nuclear weapons. He just had the Prigozhin mutiny that he was facing. The worst thing that could happen to Vladimir Putin would end his regime is if he gave an order to use nuclear weapons and it wasn't carried out. It won't gain him any territory. It could blow back into Russia. And kill Russians. And then also it completely destroys his rationale for the war, which is that he is liberating the Ukrainians and Russians are one people, that there's a Nazi regime that has taken over the country, and that he's liberating the Ukrainian people from this Nazi regime that's taken over their country. It's kind of not a brotherly act to nuke the people you're trying to save.
So there's
no rationale for him to use it, and I don't think he would do it.
And just to be clear about one thing you said there.
Self-deterring.
If the nuclear weapons are fired into Ukraine, the fallout could blow back into Russia. Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
That there could be.
Yes.
Okay.
But even if it didn't, how do you justify saying you're liberating a country and you're liberating your Ukrainian brothers by nuking them?
I'm with you 100% on that. I'm not questioning it. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yep.
Now, let's look at as you know, Mark, I'm kind of a long Twilight Struggle guy.
Yep. Me
and
too.
Over the long scope of history, if we are in 2026 or 2027 and we have a peace in Ukraine that has a fortified border about where the line is now, and NATO and the United States are allowed to put soldiers into Ukraine to protect that line, and Russia has stopped the war, would you call that a victory for Ukraine?
In the sense that, yes, they've saved their country, and yes, so think about this. That would work possibly as a deal if it involved Ukraine joining NATO.
Yes.
So here, this is why this is important, and this is why when Trump negotiates some sort of a deal like this, number one, you need to give them as much weaponry as they can right now, so they can make as many gains. So that line is as far towards Russia as possible when he makes to make that choice. Konrad Adenauer had to make a very similar choice, right? Germany was divided, and he made the choice to accept a temporary division of Germany in exchange for the security of NATO membership for his country. And I think that President Zelensky may have to make a similar choice at some point. The only way it works, and this is why Donald Trump should support Ukraine eventually coming into NATO as part of this, is that if he doesn't, then all Putin will do is wait for 4 years until he leaves office, right? And then he'll resume his conquest, just like he did, before. In 2014, he invaded Ukraine, seized Crimea. Trump came into office, he stopped. Then Trump left office, Biden came in, he resumed. Trump could come back into office again and negotiate a settlement, and as soon as he's gone, another weak president comes in and
that's why you want Ukraine to be able to be in
So the only way
NATO.
you stop that, Vladimir Putin, the only countries that Vladimir Putin has invaded are non-NATO countries, and so that's the way you secure a peace that for Trump's interest is to have something that outlasts him, right?
Yes.
That goes down in history.
But by saying what you just said is that it means that you completely accept the line, which is that Ukraine is a legitimately independent country from Russia.
100%.
And I worry that some of President Trump's advisors aren't there yet.
I worry about that too.
And that's just really troubling.
Yeah. And this is one of my great worry about a second Trump administration generally, is not so much Trump, it's the people he'll surround himself with. I think that a lot of the people who I've given you a list of accomplishments that Trump has had in office that I compiled, and it's one of the as I put it in a column with the mute button on, one of the great conservative presidencies of my lifetime.
Yes, and I've quoted the mute button.
But that was in part because Trump in his wisdom, surrounded himself with a team of rivals. He brought in people who were hawks, who were neocons, who were isolationists, who had different points of view, and he listened to everybody and took good advice and made decisions. And when people pushed back on him when he was good at that, he would listen. And I worry that he's going to surround him, that a lot of the good people who surrounded him in the first term might not be there in the second term, and that he'll be surrounded by the wrong kinds of people.
All right. Well, that brings us right to the next topic and last topic for our conversation, and that is what's happened to you mentioned the left in your normal way earlier. What's happened to the right? And you've written a column recently about sort of a fascination with Orban and a willingness through Orban to support China's bad behavior. What's going on there?
So for some reason, there's a segment of the right that has just fallen in love with Viktor Orban, who is I call him a Hungarian David Duke. He said that we won't have race mixing in Hungary, which is just a comment that any American politician said it, and they'd be.
Well, President Trump said they're poisoning our blood.
That's a little bit different.
It's pretty close.
Anyway, we're not going to debate that here today. He's a best friend of Vladimir Putin and an apologist for Vladimir Putin. But one thing I thought united all the factions of the right was that we all abhor China, and that we all want to see China as the big threat to our security, and that we are united in facing down China. Right? Well, Viktor Orban is Xi Jinping's best friend. Yeah. He's taken more Belt and Road money than any leader. He's turned his digital infrastructure over to Huawei, which Donald Trump said he kicked Huawei out and said that with any country that did business with Huawei couldn't share intelligence with the United States. So that's an information threat to the United States and to NATO. And yet, for some reason, Xi Jinping's favorite European leader has become a favorite of CPAC, which holds an annual conference there, and our friends at the Heritage Foundation, who have somehow fallen in love with Viktor Orban. So I'm glad there's one conservative think tank in Washington that hasn't.
So, but the way you explain it is,
Sorry,
but
Robert,
that was very nice. I don't. But I think maybe you are more a student of the history of the right than I am. I suspect you are. I've studied it too, but not quite to the extent you have. Is it order? Is it a love of autocracy? What is it that is bringing this attraction about?
So, I think a lot of them would say, if I was putting myself in their shoes, they would say, look, he's got a pro-family policy. He's against open borders. He's against globalism, which they define as supranational power in the European Union, and all the rest of it. And to that I say, okay, what's wrong with Giorgia Meloni? Yeah. What's wrong with Andrzej Duda in Poland? Yeah. These are also conservative Christian leaders who are against all these things that you think are important, but aren't in love with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. Yeah. So the only thing that separates them is the love of Putin and Xi. So why aren't you having CPAC in Warsaw? Yeah. Why don't you have CPAC Rome? Why Budapest? Yeah. And if the only thing that's separating them is their love of anti-American tyrants, then maybe you have a little complicity in that. Yeah.
Okay, final word, Marc. Where are we in this? One of the things I love about your writing is it's you like the give and pull and push and thrust of democracy and politics, and you know that we live in a boisterous place, America. America's boisterous, and we don't all agree, but you relish in the battle. I like that about you. You're kind of a happy warrior.
Thank you.
And I guess so. Let's just finish with how do you feel about America?
I'm always bullish on America. This is the greatest country in the history of the world. It's always faced threats. We've been in worse places than we are today. In the 1970s, it's actually funny. The parallels between the 1970s and today are amazing. From the energy crisis and high gas prices to Russia invading its neighbors, an embarrassing presidential relative doing business with dictators, president begging OPEC to produce more oil. There's a lot of parallels, and this country is always one great leader away from turning things around. I don't know if Donald Trump is that leader. We'll see. But
well, I was going to say, Mark, that one big difference is that we
don't have Ronald Reagan.
We don't have Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, no, I know.
And we still don't have Ronald Reagan.
No, we don't. But I think that the problem we do have is that we don't have the Democrats have not provided and you alluded to this, a benign alternative. In fact, if anything, they've confirmed everything that he warned us about. So I mean, Donald Trump won the election in 2016 by running on illegal immigration. And so if you're a Democrat and you saw that, when you take back the White House, is the smart thing to do to unleash the worst border crisis in American history that just confirms everything that he said? I mean, you can go down the issues. And if there was a Democratic alternative that said the era of big government is over, I mean, we didn't know how good we had it with Bill Clinton. Era of big government is over. Illegal immigration is bad.
By the way, that's a column.
Welfare reform.
Let me just we'll finish with this. That is a column you should consider writing. Why is Bill Clinton persona non grata in the Democratic Party? I mean, and because they have definitely turn their back on him, and I think it's to their harm politically. And with that, we will end.